Well, ladies and gentlemen, the digitization and responsibility, that is an enormous charge. Because the biggest, let me just, in a short way, say what has been put on the table during those last hours here. Two slogans or two analyses in one sentence. The biggest risk is to leave opportunities untapped. I have heard it in different ways, again and again. And then the biggest danger is the techno-pessimism. So how can we bring the two together? The advancement, the doing things, and persuading the people, the citizens, your employees in your companies, that this is for the good of everybody. And we have heard how difficult it is. Are we in a technical and an ethical bubble? Do we think benefit? Why the people out there think danger? And in this sense, I'm very happy that Jens Spahn said that very soon, under German presidency of the Council of the European Union, second half of 2020, the question of the health data and the security for the citizens and the possibility for the researchers in same time will be tackled. So to bring these two elements together, the opportunities and the eliminating of the tech pessimism. Now, I do not know with whom to start, but let's start with Telefónica. 350 million customers in 16 countries. Well, that is a responsibility. Because as you know perfectly well, it is not about the network. The network has to be steady, solid, but it is what is going to be done with the network, with the applications, most of all in 5G, transport, health, IoT, industry. So Markus Haas, CEO Deutschland, is data having an effect on climate change in a positive way or in a negative way? Because we have also heard today the amount of data which we need and the amount of CO2 emissions which that provokes. In the same time, you want to utilize all this data and all this communication in order to solve the problem. How are you bringing these two opposites together?
To answer your question, absolutely. I think the data that we generate today, we all work still in silo-orientated, so we do not share many data with other industries. And I believe, despite the connectivity that you already mentioned, is that we enter the decade of mobility in the next 10 years, because everything will be connected with everything, and we collect, and I think you were also hearing this morning, tons of data. And I think to structure this data and take use of this data will be a key enabler in order to achieve our climate targets. What we can avoid on emissions, how we can improve logistics, how we can share more data, how we can make, at the end of the day, also allow the e-mobility to start through, I think this will all be done through sharing data. I think 5G will be a key enabler, and 5G will also allow us to collect even more data, because let's just assume the kind of code and data a self-autonomous car will collect is more than you need to build an airplane today. So the amount of data that we will have in order to get the value out of that data, I think is very important. And I think also as Europe, I think we are in a key position because we have understood that data has a value and we need to treat data in a way that is according to our value set. And I think we should not be too pessimistic, because we were also hearing about the pessimistic things about the US and China. I think we have given ourselves a value set, and we have also understood that climate change is happening in Europe. So we are at the forefront. We are leading in Europe in order to achieve our climate targets. And with the right infrastructure and how we work with data, I'm sure we'll be the first and will clearly be able to make the challenge possible.
Now, Markus, you are responsible for a company here in Germany, which says that already since 2016, and I quote, Telefónica Germany is 100% green energy. How do you manage that?
Well, at the end of the day, with new technology, I think it's about not stopping investment. I think the new technology that we now provide uses 80% less energy that we had technology provided in the last iteration of technology. But I think it's also about the excitement of our employees to bring up and bring new ideas in order to improve the business step by step. I think this is our supply chain, this is how we manage emissions in the company, and this is also what we share with other companies. I think is the housekeeping that every company needs to do, but I think there's even more purpose that we can do as a mobile operator because we connect everything, and we can also allow many other industries to improve on that one. But we set this priority very, very early in our company, and there's a very high engagement also from our employees. There's a purpose in order to achieve these targets.
You have heard, like many of us, the CEO of Merck speaking this morning and giving these very shocking numbers. In 2030, 20% of the energy consumption worldwide will come from the data gathering. So 5G will certainly explode the data also in the private use, in the industrial use, the data also for health and for transport. So how can you say in 2030, well, what Stefan Oschmann told us has fortunately not happened?
I think the net balance, and I think this is what you're referring to, what new technologies create or cause on additional emissions and what they can avoid is heavily positive. And I think we will only overcome the current challenges if we invest into new technologies, because the efficiency that we can gather by avoiding most of the traffic, I think we can reduce 70% of traffic jams in Germany if we just use the right data. We can avoid 30% of traffic overall in the country if we use the right data. So from that perspective, the traffic net balance you're referring to is heavily positive, and we will only come into a situation to achieve the targets that also the new Commission have set by 2050 to be completely neutral if we leverage new technologies.
Second on the row is Otto Group. Now, Otto Group is a development out of a traditional media group and exchange of goods. And you are, Sebastian Klauke, you are the executive board member responsible for e-commerce, technology, and for corporate ventures. You have really needed in the time before to change your company from a traditional company to an e-commerce company and a technology company. How did you manage to do that?
Indeed, Otto Group has a long tradition. Last year in 2019, we celebrated our 70th anniversary, so it's 7 decades of change in a way. And since we were in the business of big book distance retail, we were of course hit by digital rather early. After media was hit, probably the next who were hit was retail, right? So fortunately, our shareholders already 20-25 years ago had the right mix of curiosity, tenacity to really push the company to early invest into new technologies and try out things when they were still very irrelevant for the revenue and the profits of the company. And so we've been building on this since. And of course, the transformation is never over, right? Retail is changing so fast, and our industry and the expectations of our customers are changing so fast that we're basically in a constant state of transformation. And what, from my point of view, the key ingredients to drive this change are, number one, culture. You need to invest in culture, because in the end, you can intellectually find out what's right for the company. If you don't get the organization to really live it and do it, you will definitely fail. So we invest a lot of management attention, of money, in proactively transforming and evolving our corporate culture. And then the second thing probably to transform successfully is listening to your customers and to your consumers. Technology is never an end in itself, but technology is a great and very powerful tool to basically improve your offering towards those who buy from you. And if you keep this in mind, that will give you a very, very clear northern star which direction to move into.
Coming back to culture, which you said, it is also the culture of your producers. You are, because I do not want to see the responsibility only on one level. We also have a social responsibility. We have an ethical responsibility. Mariette is really the one who knows very well about this. But let's also come to the social responsibility, a double one, I think, for a company like yours. Those of your producers, like say in Bangladesh, what are their conditions of producing? And second, your employees, you have roughly 52,000 employees in 30 countries. Right, yeah. I can imagine that not all are at the level of the new technology. So how do you, look that your producers are on the level of corporate social responsibility and that your employees are not left behind in the digital development of your company?
Yeah, so regarding question one, taking responsibility for our full supply chain and also for the environmental implications of our business is something that's deeply rooted in our DNA. I had to take over the seat on the panel at short notice, so I did some quick preparation. And what I looked up again is the first year these things like nature conservation and fairness standards in supply chain became part of our official company targets was 1986. So almost 35 years ago, this was explicitly addressed as our responsibility. And since Otto Group has been investing in basically transparency along the supply chain. And we are still, if you want to look up the status quo, you can go to our corporate website, you'll find an interactive map where we basically give some transparency, which of our manufacturers have been certified by which standard and so on and so on. So a lot of investment have been done. And we right now are in the process of setting our next 5-year targets for our basically responsibility strategy. And we're again trying to raise the bar and trying to formulate measurable KPIs that we want to further improve transparency along the value chain, right? So that's something that of course requires a constant effort, and I guess nobody is perfect in this respect, neither are we, but we've been on it for quite a long while and have invested quite a bit, right? And the other question, how can you basically make sure all your employees in a big and even decentral organization are not lost on the path of digitalization? I think the key component here is that you take your responsibility to enable lifelong learning and evolving qualification of your employees very, very seriously, right? Many people going into some kind of traditional industry where digitalization is right about to strike feel like you have to exchange large parts of the people. I don't believe this. I believe you have to invest to make the people you have fit for whatever comes next, right? And for example, last year we started a big company-wide program where we invest a lot of time and working time to further qualify our entire team across all different functions, be it people who work in the warehouse or be it people who work in front of a computer, to qualify them about what changes in the digital economy, right? And give them, of course, tailored to the different groups of employees, give them basically a significant amount of training based around a video program combined with other offline measures to basically give people the chance to keep pace with the development and be able to grow with their evolving roles along the way.
Now, Markus, I suppose, coming from a less traditional company, you do not have the same problem, but I suppose you have a problem too, of bringing your people to the next wave of massive data coming out. How are you training them? And then a question to both of you, who is training the trainers? Because when I look at our education systems, I would like to ask both of you, because you are working here in Germany, do you think they are up to the course?
You want to go first? Yeah.
I think that's actually a very good question, because we know if I just use data, I can take decisions better, faster, and much more efficiently. On the other side, if you have people or somebody who has done marketing for 20 years and there's a lot of experience, and confront people with real-time data, it creates stress, because real-time data, for people who used to have a routine in doing, and they're doing their job brilliantly. But in order to open this, so we opened all our data to all our employees, so the anonymous data of our customers belong to our employees, but it takes time before they use this data, because it's all there. You have the algorithms, you have the real-time data, but real-time data causes stress, because in the past you did a marketing campaign, you did big TV adverts, and then you were hoping that people are buying or using your products. Now you know in real time what people think about your campaign, if they like it, if they buy it online or offline. So I think you have a completely different pattern also that you create with these data. And to bring people closer together, I think is a challenge for every company, because the young people who come from university, who know all that, they are grown up with the data. But people are in the middle age who have never worked or now see these opportunities. I think is a process that you need to manage very well, because data could also be very frightened, because you know in real time if your performance was good or was not so good, or if you need to improve. And I think this is a big challenge for every company, that you also use the data in a responsible way, that you don't allow abusive behavior, that you don't blame people with data, so that you have rules of engagement, how you use this data, because actually you could know everything in these days. And this is to get the balance right, that you get the benefit for the business, but people love to work with data, that they're open to work with data, is a challenge. It's not easy, but then we find a good way and a good compromise, but we are not at the end, we are at the beginning.
So when you ask who trains the trainers, I just a few minutes ago I said, I believe you can take large parts of your company along and have them evolve and grow with the development of the market. That's one side of the medal. The other side of the medal is you need to establish a culture of openness where you, as a big organization, immerse yourself in what's new. Yeah? I mean, a danger of very successful large organizations is that at some point you start believing you know it all, right? And you're like the company who do it best, and everybody can learn from you, but there's no need to learn anymore. And you have to keep a learning attitude. And one way of doing this for us in Otto Group is our connection to venture capital. We started pretty early, much more than 10 years ago, to invest in venture capital. Not only invest, basically we helped found 2 venture capital firms, eVentures and Project A, and we're still very closely involved with them. And our senior management, we go and visit small early stage startups to like really basically have them kick us and show what we haven't thought of, what we forgot, where the danger is coming from. And you have to try and expose your entire organization to the forces of disruption and to what's new, and to people who do it much better than we do, because we have all this rucksack of legacy that we have to transform and others don't. And if you ask about the education system, you ask provocatively, do you think the education system is doing a perfect job in like preparing people for the digital economy? Very short answer, very short answer is no, I don't think so. But I have to be very frank, I don't have the silver bullet. I see how difficult it is to transform the learning culture and the development in a corporate organization, and then of course to do it for a whole society is very, very difficult. So I don't want to pretend I know how it really can be solved, but one thing I'm certain of is the role digital tools, ability to work with technology plays in our present education system is still far too low. This is a literacy thing, I believe. It needs to become something like reading and writing, and this is definitely not the case yet. So the focus put on digital skills in the education definitely needs to be improved a lot.
Marietje, I left the gentleman speak first.
It's not a problem.
Because we are so dominant. 2 girls and 2 boys. I mean, that is a domination of the girls.
Do you want us to stay on stage or go grab coffee?
So you have already several times heard during this DLD and before and after also Marietje Schaake from the International Policy Director of Stanford University. She was before a very efficient and policy influencing MEP. And
we were colleagues. I don't know if everybody knows this. Different political parties, but both in the European Parliament.
But working together.
Absolutely.
That's possible.
Definitely.
That's possible.
Necessary in a democracy.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, and there we come to democracy, Mariette, because Markus has spoken about abuse of data. Mm-hmm. And I have noted down one of your sentences you said in this DLD. Do we want platforms built on efficiency or on rights and trust? So when you have heard the two gentlemen representing different tasks and different industries, one in the network and one in e-commerce and technology, how do you analyze the problems they have to solve, and what can intellectuals, what can university, what can experts do in order to help them to be efficient? Because there is this contradiction between being successful on an economic point of view and preserving the rights and not abuse the population which has become very distrustful.
Yes.
Do you have a solution?
Well, let's try to slice the problem first, because there's a lot in what you ask and a lot in what you shared. But for me, when I think about what is responsibility and what is taking responsibility, it is about caring for more than only your self-interest. So when I think about the role of a company, we heard a lot about your internal challenges, leadership, choices for sustainability, for retraining and advancing your purposes. But the question is, what is the sort of role of the corporate citizen, if you will, within a society? And I think if we look at the relationship between the common interest, the public interest, and especially companies that advance and rely on digitization, there are a couple of asymmetries that we really need to be mindful of. One, when you talk about attacks, the accountability gap. I think we can read about the most shocking attacks every day, data breaches, hacks, doxing, ransomware, impacting vulnerable communities, and hardly ever, even the worst possible incidents, do we see people being held to account. Fines, prison sentences, liability questions. And clearly, when people feel senses of injustice and see no consequences, the people they can hold to account are their democratically elected officials. So responsibility should also translate into accountability. I think that's one point. Second point is, I think, an obvious one, but still perhaps worth mentioning. All those bigger challenges, education, climate change, and how to mitigate it, they require a common approach, and it also requires paying into the common efforts through taxation. That asymmetry is too significant, and it's leading to a lot of anger vis-a-vis the tech companies, and also a big push towards politicians to do something about it. And then thirdly, I'm sure we can talk about more, but one that preoccupies me, and it's where experts come in as well, is the question of knowledge and understanding of the technology. It's not only a challenge for talents that you want to hire, it's also a challenge for politicians to stay up to speed about where the technologies are and to make evidence-based, well-informed policies. I would add to that it wouldn't hurt for CEOs and leaders in the tech space to also brush up their knowledge about the importance of policy and democracy to bridge the gap. So I think that there's a couple of imbalances that if we give it more attention, the question of overcoming the mistrust, of making sure that people take their responsibility, not only if they're well-willing and willing to have, their time spent here on a stage and the reputations of their companies known, but also those companies that may not be as well willing have to be held to minimum standards. And that's why I make the case for stronger benchmarks or regulation, if you want to call it that, to make sure that there is a level playing field, that there's clarity on what we expect when we talk about responsibility, and so that there's also clarity when you go across the line that there will be a consequence.
Now, from what I have heard yesterday and today, from very many different experts coming from different environments, one thing became very clear. We risk, on one hand, to do in our policies concerning the environment some kind of greenwashing in surface.
Sure.
And we risk at the same time to do on the ethical grounds an ethical washing. I see this really coming. Somebody said we have 180 AI regulations in the drawers. Now we do not need 180, we need one. And if we have not one, we need it to be applied. And that is a very big problem. How can we agree on having rules in order to have responsibility? And to bring back through those rules, because they are applied and people can see that they are applied and technology is doing something positive, then this pessimism will vanish. Because I am convinced that the distrust comes from not knowing. So what can we do to give back the trust to the citizens? What can we do in regulation, for instance? You have a big experience on this.
Also, I agree that all these initiatives in terms of ethics guidelines, you referred maybe to the count that the Fundamental Rights Agency in Europe has made 180 government-led initiatives for ethical guidelines. Now, I know in a lot of the companies you work in, you're working on ethical guidelines, Chinese government's working on ethical guidelines, and who can be against ethics? We all love ethics. Ethics is great. But if we can talk about, what if we sit down and talk for 5 minutes what it is, we may find how hard it is to define exactly what we mean by ethics, whether it's in the design and the development process or whether it's in the use of the technologies. And for a moment, I would like to park the question of ethics and come back to the laws that we already have. Because sometimes in discussions about what do we need to do, it almost seems like we have to start from absolutely zero, and that is thankfully not the case. We have a lot of principles, a lot of laws that are not controversial. I honestly think that across a number of democracies, principles like non-discrimination, not rejecting people for your services, for your products on the basis of the color of their skin, their religion, their sexual orientation, their ethnic background, their age, what have you, gender, is a given that we respect and adhere to. But the question is, how do you enforce it vis-a-vis algorithms that make decisions that are entirely invisible? Invisible for the customer, invisible for the regulator that is supposed to assess whether companies discriminate or organizations discriminate, and also invisible to the lawmakers. So I believe that we have to begin by the laws that we already have and make sure that they actually apply online as they do offline. It's a sort of mantra we hear. The UN believes in it, the EU believes in it, the Council of Europe believes in it, and I think it's a good starting point. But now we have to implement. That means, I believe, creating access to information that is essential to make sure that the laws are also applied and enforced. So it's going to be tough for companies that believe that trade secrets can protect all of their algorithmic processes and data. Again, I see a huge asymmetry in access to information here that is unsustainable. Unsustainable. Because when we hear promises of artificial intelligence having to be understandable, explainable, accountable, reliable, ethical, these are all, again, principles that sound very nice, but where the devil is in the detail is what that looks like. And without access to information, we cannot implement those principles. The same goes for antitrust, much more economic question of a level playing field, a principle that really stands in most open economies. You cannot have price agreements, you cannot have anti-competitive behavior. And here too, we have to ask ourselves, what do we know about the anti-competitive behavior inside of companies, inside of processes that are protected by trade secrets? So I believe the key to all these questions is first and foremost access to information that will help better informed political discussions, and will also help implement the laws that we already have, that we don't have to begin from scratch, we have to just bring it to the execution phase.
access to information, it was interesting to hear both of you in very different jobs and in very different industries have spoken about this access of information. But very shortly, after having heard Mariette, could you please elaborate a little more how you in Telefónica and you in Otto want to put this access to information and the inclusion of, to go away from the silo thinking and have a more inclusive responsibility. How do you put that in practice?
Before I answer to that, please allow me 1 minute to answer to some points you made. Because there's one point I very strongly agree, that businesses must be good citizens. We need to be actors who proactively contribute to solving and not just stick with the framework and say, hey, we stick to the law, that's enough. I totally agree with that. Yeah? What I'm wondering about is you put a lot of emphasis in your argumentation on regulation and how to enforce the laws we already have. I believe the challenges we face as a society, let me only pick two. Yeah? Climate change, we mentioned it a million times, and also like future of work driven by technology. Mm-hmm. I don't feel we have a solution yet that's ready to become law, to become regulation, that then only has to be enforced. So I feel what we are lacking is a real cross-society dialogue or process where we all together strive for a better solution. And I feel like we're a little bit stuck in the old finger-pointing world where everybody says, hey, the others need to provide the solution. And I think we need to in some way open it up. And I feel that we as businesses need to be co-initiators and co-drivers of this kind of dialogue and movement. Right? And this is something I don't think it contradicts what you said, but I just wanted to add a slightly different emphasis, because I think in that aspect it goes beyond finding good regulation and enforcing it. We're in some aspects are earlier in the process and still need to find the actual solution.
Well, I agree, it depends on the topic, right? Mm-hmm. I think everybody's trying to understand the vast impact of climate change and similarly job displacement. But there's also a question of rights. There's also a question of what companies know and what the public knows. And there's also a question of well-willing companies that may say, let's all sit together and engage in this conversation, and companies that will never come and engage unless they have to. So I think you're absolutely right. Depends on the phase we're in, the topic we're trying to address, and who is necessary to engage in order to fix it. So surely dialogue, common understanding, common taking of responsibility is great, but the one thing I take from 10 years in the European Parliament is that you normally don't regulate for good days where everybody's well-willing, but you have to have some kind of bottom line, basic benchmark that everybody has to adhere to. So it's I think, two sides of the same coin.
I think two dimensions. We in Telefónica, we strongly believe your personal data belongs to our customers, to me as an individual. And I think we have a lot of rules and regulation. But we strongly believe you need a human right in Europe for your personal data. Mm-hmm. Because your data could stand for your dignity, could be forever what you do. If these data are abused, and I think this also differentiates us from the other parts of the world. Yes. And this human right for data that we heavily apply for could be the standard basis also to achieve digital sovereignty that the new Commission is asking for. So we heavily apply for that. And to the second dimension of your question, we use anonymized data where we have the allowance of our customers, and we could use this. I just thought we don't share with Otto our anonymized data, but I'm sure if we would do that cross-silo and would share this data, that you could produce your products much more efficient or can generate other services together with other industries more on the horizontal level rather than in the silos that we are still all organized in. So these are the two dimensions that I'm personally strongly convinced in that could really help us also in Europe to achieve the target that we have and clearly also differentiate us with the value set we have given ourselves here in Europe.
I'm very proud of both of you representing your industry, and your answers have been very European. With the European point of view of the responsibility, not only for making money, but also the social responsibility you have. And I think it would be good to hear more of that and to go for this idea of, yes, let's be transparent. Yes, we have nothing to hide. let's exchange and let's finally go out of the silo thinking and the silo behaving. And there I think Europe can show the way. And because our next speaker is the one who carries the responsibility in this field in the European Commission, I think that what has been said now by our industry and by two former lawmakers is a good basis for Europe to become strong and world leading on these subjects. Thank you.
Thank you.